Thank you. My name is C.J. Rhodes, and I have the distinct honor of pastoring this church, Mountain Town Baptist Church, which is the oldest historically African-American church here in Jackson, Mississippi. We were founded in 1835 in the basement of First Baptist Church, and we are named after a deacon from First Presbyterian Church, Thomas Helm. He and his wife donated the first property to us, and so we've been around for almost 200 years. And we are honored to lead this conversation around race and religion and racial solidarity and what we can do as Christians, both black and white and other, to bring about the kinds of gospel transformations, both personally and collectively, that I believe we all hope and desire we can do. And so it's my privilege tonight to welcome you here and to also welcome these persons who will be leading us in a conversation from the perspective of the 30 and younger crowd about how they envision race and religion today. And so it's my pleasure to introduce one person who will be introducing all the rest. And we thank God for your being here and for Phillip Holmes for his dedication in helping putting this together. So let's put our hands together and thank
Good evening. I'm excited about this conference for so many reasons. I remember when Bradley first called me and asked me to be a part of it, and I was just like, well, what? What? I mean, because when I look at the panelists, or at least the main guys who are going to be participating in this conference, guys like Pastor C.J. Rhodes, Dr. Anthony Bradley, Ligon Duncan, as well as Brother Bobby Griffith, I'm kind of like a little fish in the pond. I'm just stoked. So, but again, I'm excited. They basically told me they wanted me to dialogue, or at least lead a dialogue on racial solidarity. And as I began to think through that, I was trying to figure out, okay, what exactly do I want to do with this night? Like, so I'm praying about it, thinking through it. And I think the biggest issue, especially with our generation, or at least my generation, is that we oftentimes look at the race issue as a thing of the past. We look at race and we're thinking through racial issues, and it's like, that's not really anything for my generation. That's more so my mom and my grandmother and my great-grandmother. But that's not really something that I need to wrestle with or think about. And then also, the second thing that we often do is we ignore the conversations. We don't want to engage in dialogue about them. And oftentimes it's out of fear, because when we think about, hey, I want to talk about race, that's a sticky subject. It's kind of like, Twitter, hashtag that awkward moment where race comes up. Nobody really wants to talk about race. And for good reasons on both sides. So what I wanted to do tonight with this panel is simply, I got a group of college students and young adults, as well as seminarians from all over Jackson, to basically join me and kind of model, hey, how is it that we have a healthy dialogue about racial solidarity? What are some things that we can say that we can kind of do and model for our attendees on tonight to say, okay, this is how you have a healthy conversation about race, which means, we're not throwing anybody under the bus. We're ready and willing to offer grace when someone says something that we don't necessarily disagree with. And the way that I thought that we should go about that is basically using three principles in race dialogue that I thought would be really helpful. Number one, first we want to define terms. The late Dr. William Kenyon, who was my professor and mentor at Belhaven University, often encouraged us to remember that words have meanings, and words mean different things to different people. So what we want to do when we start throwing out terms like white privilege and racism, prejudice, and all these other things, hey, what are we communicating when we say these things? What do these terms mean? So we're going to define terms tonight in dialogue. All of a sudden, also another thing that we want to cover is we want to be quick to listen. Oftentimes I feel like when we're having racial conversation or race-based dialogues, we don't really listen to the other person. We're so ready, and this happens in any kind of conversation, am I right? We're so ready to kind of get our point across. I'm more so waiting for you to stop talking, as opposed to engaging and listening and try to sympathize and empathize with what it is that you're saying. So I'm hoping and praying that that's one thing that we'll do tonight, that we'll be quick to listen. Hey, I want to understand where my brother in Christ, where my sister in Christ is coming from. And last but not least, slow to anger. Listen, we're all human. We're all going to say something stupid every now and then. And we have to, in order for us to continue to have healthy racial dialogue, we have to be ready and willing to be gracious, to be patient, to kind of hear the other person out, and if they say something stupid, I'm not going to throw this person under the bus because I know in about 10 minutes I'll do the same thing. So that's the purpose of the night. And we're all doing that from the foundation of the gospel. Because Jesus came and he's from a whole nother race. He's from the God race. And he came down and he lived among sinful man. And we gave him every single reason to abandon us, to throw us under the bus. But what you see him doing is going to the cross on our behalf, dying for our sins, resurrecting, redeeming all of mankind. This broken, sinful world that was messed up and tainted because we basically said, hey, we want to be gods. We want to elevate ourselves to your position. It's now tainted. And he came and said, okay, you know what? I'm going to redeem these. And that's what, Bradley always harps on this. Creation, fall, redemption. That's what the entire message of the Bible is all about. And we're hoping that we can model what redemption kind of looks like in this dialogue tonight. So I want to do that by first introducing you guys to our panelists for the night. I'll start on my far left, and then I'll come across and end with Nathaniel, or Nate, as we like to call him. I have Scott Lucky. Scott Lucky is a second-year MDiv student at RTS Jackson. His wife is named Ashley Lucky. And I've got to know Scott over the past 2 years, and it's been a blessing. He's a brother that I've had many of these dialogues with, and I know that he sincerely desires to understand and engage and reach the lost, no matter what their race is. So I'm happy to have Scott here. Give Scott a hand. Anthony Forrest, Paul, as we like to call him, because he's the old head of the group. Paul, he was like everybody under 30. Paul was like around 32. Paul's going to be joining us tonight. He is a first-year MDiv student at RTS Jackson. I met a lot of people in this room on Twitter, by the way. So that may say something about my Twitter usage. But Paul actually found out about RTS when we were tweeting about the new initiative that we started at RTS Jackson. And as I got a chance to dialogue with Anthony and get to know him and build with him, he's become like a big brother in a lot of ways. So I'm happy to have him here on the night to talk about a lot of these issues. Next, give him a hand. Next, we have Kelly Weber. Kelly is a sophomore at Belhaven University. She is a dance major. I met Kelly. Kelly's a resident assistant at Belhaven University, and I met her at the beginning of the year when I took the job as a resident director. And I was really intrigued by her heart, her transparency, honesty. And she doesn't like a whole lot of people to know this, so since there aren't too many Belhaven students here, I'll go ahead and reveal it. She's only 18, but she's a sophomore. Came to college at 17, and most people, you know how you can kind of tell when the youngins are on campus, you shouldn't be here. You should have waited like 2 more years before you got here. Kelly is not one. She's actually in leadership at Belhaven and does it well. I have a lot of respect for her, so I thought it would be good for her to be a part of this panel as well. She's from Delaware, so give her a hand. Next, we have Corey Porter. Also met Corey last year at the Impact Conference. And we were there and we were like, hey, we want you to come to RTS. And we kept basically stalking her the entire conference, trying to get her to come to RTS. She kept saying she wasn't going to come, but the Lord said otherwise. Now she's here. Corey is very intelligent, has a heart for the gospel, has a heart for people, has a heart for ministry. The Lord has gifted her in a lot of unique ways, and I'm glad that she decided to join the panel tonight as well. Give her a hand. Next, we have Mike Morris. Mike is a graduate of Jackson State University, and I often joke with Mike, and this is not true, but it's more of an inside joke between him and I. I'll often call him the sideline Black Panther. But Mike is a really good guy, has a heart for the gospel. I actually met Mike before I got to Jackson State, where I also interned with Reformed University Fellowship. And this is another guy that just has a heart for people, has a heart and a mind for truth, really wants to understand various social issues, but does not separate those things from the gospel. He knows how to keep the main thing the main thing. So I've enjoyed getting to know Mike, and Mike is always the guy that's usually challenging me to go farther as we talk through have different conversations. So I'm happy he was joining us on tonight as well. Give Mike a hand. Last but not least, we have Nathaniel Travers. Nathaniel, or Nate, that's a little bit easier to say, is a native of Florida. He actually was at Belhaven for a little while, left to take a year off and pursue a Bible education, went to a Bible college. Just really wanted to, as he explained to me, was a time of self-evaluation, basically. Hey, there's some things I want to think about. There's some things I want to really know my word a little bit better. So he left Belhaven for a year and came back and is now continuing his education. I think he's a business major right now at Belhaven University and is also on the football team. I've gotten to know this brother. I've seen him grow by leaps and bounds. I knew him when I was in school, and now he's back ready to put his hands to the plow, share the gospel, love on people, and do his thing. And he's a light on the Belhaven campus, so I'm happy that he was joining us on tonight. Give him a hand. Real quick, just to give you guys an idea of where this dialogue is going to go. First, I had the discussion begins at 7:30, so we're a little bit ahead of time, which is good. At 8:20, well, right before we have questions from the audience, you guys are going to have a lot of time to dialogue as well with the panel, as well as myself. And even if you want to throw a few questions at CJ or Bradley, they may be, or Ligon as well, and Bobby is there. We have all the big wigs here tonight. Those guys may be more than willing to answer any questions that our panel is unable to answer. But right before that, Nate is going to come up and do a spoken word for us right after we end our dialogue or our conversation. Right after that, we'll open the floor up and we'll let you guys come in and say, hey, these are some questions that we want to have. Please, as Bradley would phrase it, keep your questions beginning with what, who, where, when, how. Oftentimes, other people won't get a chance to ask their questions if we get up and start making statements or preaching sermonettes. So we want to avoid that if possible. We really want to try to engage questions as best as we possibly can. And then after that, we'll have some closing remarks and then we'll have prayer. So we still have some people coming in. Welcome. Just come on in and have a seat. And we'll begin our dialogue. Now, first I want to start with our first principle that I sent you guys. We talked about defining terms. Terms like racism, terms like prejudice, terms like white privilege. In an everyday dialogue, when you guys hear the word racism, what is the first thing that comes to mind?
Democrats and Republicans?
Democrats and Republicans.
I guess the first thing when I hear it comes to mind when racism is being talked about is depending on the context. So like if I hear somebody in my generation talking about racism, usually it's just what they perceive to be racism, right? And so sometimes it's not really rooted in anything other than they're mad at a teacher, they're mad at a friend, they're mad at somebody who snubbed them in the bank. However, when I hear older generations speak about racism, I sometimes pay more attention. I think there's a little bit more weight, substance to it, right? And so it just depends on the context in which I hear it. And usually it's just talking about the disparity between the races.
Now, you mentioned something about racism and it being thrown around for different reasons, a part of different generations. Do we feel like that's a term that's thrown around loosely, that's used loosely?
I think most definitely. I think when I think of the term racism, I think of
Try to use something like this in case.
I think of at least two separate definitions. I mean, for one, I think history has shown us that racism can be used to describe people that have biases against certain people because of their skin pigmentation, etc. But another form of racism that is often
First of all, what is racism? Who can give me a clear, concise definition of what racism is? Anthony has something to say.
No, I was gonna say, it wasn't gonna be necessarily the answer.
Okay.
I was thinking about something else on the back end.
So I'm gonna say practices and actions that like pretty much contribute to like the division between the races. Pretty much just power one, race one to be higher. And so we can do that in different settings and different contexts. So you see that in America between whites and blacks, but you see it overseas in Africa and different places as well. So.
One definition, and I'll go ahead and wrap that question up. One definition, and I kind of got this somewhere, it says the belief that all members of each race possess characteristics or abilities specific to that race, so as to distinguish it. What do you guys think about that definition?
Can you repeat it?
Sure. The belief that all members of each race possess characteristics or abilities specific to that race. What do you think about that definition?
So all black people can play basketball, right? Is that what you said?
According to that definition,
Right.
they would say that that's racist.
No, I like there's prejudice, and then, I really draw a big distinction between two, because there's, I'm basing my decision off of an individual's color, and it might not necessarily take it to, a racist degree. When I think racism, I think, 30s, 40s, 50s, violence, Jim Crow laws, so anytime I hear the word racism, I automatically take it, that far. Prejudice, I would just define as basing a decision off a person's skin color rather than,
That's good. And that word prejudice could be a little bit, I guess it could be a lot broader than just a person's skin color. Oftentimes you see prejudice when it comes to women. You see prejudices when it comes to a person's social class. So it varies a little bit broader than race. But what this definition, what do you guys think about this definition now? About a specific race possessing characteristics or abilities specific to that race?
I don't know that it's actually biblical. If we're all made in the image of God, then we all descend from Adam, who is, the first human. And so because of that, I don't know that there are distinguishing features that are inherent to certain, as far as that would elevate them above or below other people.
I guess the main problem that I would see with this definition is that it doesn't go far enough. I guess it limits it to just, okay, if I say that this guy, has the ability to do something that I don't have the ability to do, and it's because he's black or it's because he's white, and those could be good qualities, those could be bad qualities, then I'm being racist. And that's neither here or there. But I think what it really gets down to is if I'm saying this person is less than me based on the color of their skin, it really has to do with value of work, intrinsic value and intrinsic work. Is this person, as an African American, less capable of performing these tasks or these duties because he's African American? Is this person unable to perform these tasks or these duties because he's white, because he's Asian? That's when you get to the issue where you say, okay, that's racist, because I'm saying no matter what, you will always be this way. You will only be able to do this. Your abilities as a person is limited because you are not of my particular race. I think that does a better job at getting at the heart of racism and what it really means. Paul, what were you going to say?
What I was actually thinking was trying to work through my definition of racism, because I don't think I ever thought about it as far as defining it. I think according to what my dad would have taught me when I was younger, it would probably be like an improper understanding of ethnicity and then being overly preferential when it comes to your personal ethnicity. So it's kind of like, this is mine, anything outside of it would be mediocre or would be less. So it's not necessarily really valuing ethnicity. That's the reason I said I wasn't really thinking about the question. I was thinking a little bit ahead of it. So I just think it's being overly preferential about what you love, which is just a sin issue there, because we love ourselves so much. So,
I think one thing that's missing from the definition that you read earlier is power. I think that racism is centered around power and maintaining hegemony over a certain, class of people on the basis of their skin color. So, and I think another reason why I don't find that definition feasible is because it ignores structures of racism that perpetuate, if it don't make any sense, that perpetuate, inequality and inequity within a nation.
Yeah, that's good. All right, so we kind of have racism out there. We have probably a decent definition, at least in our minds, where the heart of it is intrinsic worth, looking at different individuals, different ethnicities, and saying, okay, if I'm implying at all with my actions or with my words that this person holds less value than I do based on the color of that person's skin, then therefore that person is probably being racist. Now, is that a conversation or a dialogue? And I've kind of talked about this or touched on this earlier, but is that a conversation or a dialogue for our day and age? And the reason why I ask that question still is because I've been told, number one, that racism doesn't exist. I mean, I've had a guy look at me in my eyes and say, nobody's racist anymore. And I'm like, okay. And then also that there was no need for Black History Month, all by the same person. And there were other people in agreement, and I was appalled because I'm just like, okay, there's some dialogue that needs to take place. Now, what I want to ask is, if we would all be in agreement that racism at least does exist, is that a conversation that we should be having today, and why? And also, is that the place of the church to have that conversation?
Yeah, I think we definitely need to have a conversation. So we should all understand that racism still does exist, and that the church should be the first one to address it. I mean, ultimately, Scott is right, it's rooted in sin. And who better to adjust and give a better focus about how to be able to free ourselves from sin than Christianity, than Christ, and the blood of Christ. I mean, ultimately, there's no liberation from racism than if you don't go to the cross for it.
It's part, first off, racism absolutely does exist, but I think a lot of it has to do with where you grow up and what's your definition of normal. Because you grow up in your family, and you don't really see other types of families. So when you go to school, you assume that everyone's family is just like yours. So you find out that something's different. You're like, oh, so it's kind of like here's an example. I grew up in Orlando, and racism does exist in Orlando, but it's not as prevalent as it is here. So when I first got to school here, my friend Rodney from Louisiana, we became best friends. We used to call him Rodney Big. Well, he had a two-tone green and gold, candy paint with rims, and I hop in a car with him, and we go down the county line, and we get pulled over for no reason, and the guy slapped the 10 meter on our window, and he told Rod to get out of the car, and I'm like, look, what did you pull us over for? He literally pulled us over for no reason, and that's what it is. It's normal for me to hang out with Black people back home. That's not normal here. So when you see a Black and white person together in Mississippi, it's either in the church or they're doing something bad. Part of it's the candy paint the rims, but it was a huge culture shock. It was a huge culture shock for me coming from Florida to Mississippi because that's not what I grew up around. You know, that's not normal. You know, back home, you know, I could ride around every day for a year and nothing will happen. You know, so you know, a lot of it is, you don't ever know someone's definition of normal. So I wouldn't be too hard on it.
Another question I kind of want to address is, why is it often hard for us to have those dialogues and those conversations about race, specifically here in the South? And I'm looking for, not necessarily for anybody to speak for their ethnicity, but in your own experience, why is this a touchy subject for different people? Because we know that we can have those conversations when everybody in the room looks like us. But why is it hard for us often to have those conversations in mixed circles? Let's talk a little bit about that.
Because it includes members of some people's family. It's a really, really tough thing to deal with because you have to reflect on, personally, I have to reflect on somebody in my family, and injustice and, you know, inequality. So most of the time, it's easy to overlook it because no members of the conversation get hurt. So we overlook it, and it's almost an understood that we definitely need, I think everybody would say to some degree that we should address it. We need to address it because of the dangers of like my kids going into a world where it's present and all of that. We definitely need to address it, but most people would say because of the discomfort, I don't want to address it. So it's oftentimes hard to have the conversation because nobody wants to be that guy that starts it. Personally speaking, if I started, I kind of understand what the response would be. Like, it's always a black dude when we talk about it. So, you know, you got that. I always have that going. Like, I always have that in the back of my mind. Like, I actually hope somebody else mentions it, so I don't have to be the stereotypical angry black man, basically. So it tends to be a hard conversation because both, at least if it's a black-white conversation, both of those individuals have a history where something could be pointed to. And you start to deal with guilt, you start to deal with anger, and there's just a lot of damage that could be done from it if it's not done properly.
Yeah, I would just kind of piggyback on that and say that there's, anytime you're uncovering any sin issue, it's very uncomfortable. And I've noticed the last 1.5 to 2 years since I've been down here and started having these discussions, realizing that I am part of the problem when I never thought I was. And so it's very easy, especially in a majority culture, to look and say, well, why are they so mad? I wasn't to blame. I ain't from around here. I'm from California. But then slowly speaking with brothers and sisters, not just black and white, but from all around the world that we have at RTS, they've been able to show me blind spots that I've had. And that has been very uncomfortable to repent of those sins and to say, you know what, I don't have it all together, and I need, what God is doing is He's reconciling men and women and children from all different nations, from all of human history, and one day we're all going to be together in heaven, Revelation 7. So how can I play a part of that? Well, it's going to take a lot of uncomfortableness and humbling myself and realizing I don't have it all together. So.
Now, kind of going off that question or that statement, Scott talked a little bit about him never really thinking about these things. Hey, that's an issue. My family didn't really have anything to do with that. I want to transition into defining white privilege. What is it that we mean when we say white privilege? Because I think oftentimes what's understood or what's heard is, well, because you're white, everything comes easy to you. Man, you don't have to work for anything. Pie in the sky, life is easy. And oftentimes when our white brothers and sisters hear that, they know it's not true. They have to work as well. They have to put their hands to the plow as well to an extent. So when we're talking about white privilege, what is it that we mean? How is it that we're understanding that concept, that definition?
I think Tim Wise would say the condition of being considered above at the start of life. In so many words, probably like the storyline, this condition of being considered ahead.
Yeah, no, I think Paul's right. It's advantages that Caucasian people may experience structural support throughout our society, right? So there may be a situation where in America that white people have privileges that we're not as black people accustomed to or given to. So far as access to education, access to employment, things like that are pretty much structures put in place that need to be taken out of place so that African Americans can also be given a fair chance to excel.
Yes, and I would say it's not just a black and white thing. It's also a bunch of different ethnicities. Out in California, this is weird, just to have two races, and they were mostly Hispanic. I grew up playing soccer, and so all my boys were Latino, and so there's that. There's Asian, Indian, Middle Eastern, all different things. So it's not just black and white, even though it seems to be playing that out down here.
But the common denominator you would say would be white, though, right? So white are privileged and minorities are not. Right?
Yeah, it's more of I think of it in two ways. Number one, what Anthony talked about. He talked about, oftentimes when I meet people, I feel as if, I have about 5 minutes to kind of prove that I'm no idiot. And different people, different individuals experience this in different circumstances. So I was telling Jamar a few weeks ago that, the rest of society, the majority at least, has the opportunity to start at about 5. You're average. I don't know you. You don't know me. I don't have any preconceived notions about you. And you could either go up or down on my level. Whereas for me, oftentimes it feels as if I'm starting at 0 and I have to work my way up. Dr. Bradley has written and talked about how he's experienced this in the classroom. So this is kind of all over the place. Number two, the second one is simply the privilege of being the majority is what we mean when we say white privilege. You have more networks. You know more people. Different people in different places. It'll be different for me as a minority. A lot of my core issues or core concerns, and for instance, large evangelical blogs are never addressed or dealt with. So when I'm reading TGC, for example, a lot of the things that they're writing about, they're general Christianity things to me, and they're not really addressing my core concerns or some of the things the questions that I grew up asking. And it's not that they're not doing a great job. It's that because they're addressing the majority issues, the majority are asking these questions, so these are the questions that they're addressing. So here's another question that kind of transitions us into some practical examples of, a lot of times you'll see us putting forth initiatives for minorities, such as Black History Month. Why do we have Black History Month? It's an obvious question to some, but let's articulate that. Why do we have Black History Month?
I think in part to kind of remedy for the effects of white privilege and these other things that we've been talking about, racism. It's, I guess, to show blacks and especially black youth that we do have a history moving us over. That we do have African Americans that have made gains within our society that have been fruitful and been productive, and that's something that we should be proud
crusade for Christ when I was an undergrad at Ole Miss, and essentially one of the guys came up and he gave the best explanation to be able to understand why initiatives or why we need to even playing field. So he pretty much said that we're in a game, I think he said baseball or something, and the score is like tilted toward the white team. Like they're so far ahead, they have so many run-ins, they have so many home runs, and we have none. But the problem is because they have led backs. I mean, they've crippled our runners. They've done everything in the situation to pretty much take us down. And so then in the halftime, or that's football, right? Okay. Well, in timeout, because everything has timeout. In timeout, what happens is they're like, okay, I'm sorry, we apologize, we're wrong, I understand. Let's go back, let's play the game fair. So they take out the red bats, they're playing with wood bats, everything's going great. And then it's like, but no, we have zero. You guys have like I won't say gazillion, you can't get that, but you have a large number that we don't have, and there's no way which we can catch back up. So how can we, in some way, go back and do the playing field? So I'm going to say African American initiatives are pretty much things to help even the playing field and allow for us brothers and sisters in Christ specifically to be able to come together and be able to pursue God's glory ultimately should be purpose of that.
I think too, they tend to add weight to issues that conversations a lot of times don't necessarily add. I think it'd be easy to say that you want to do a particular thing, but to actually put something into action, it carries over. It's obvious, it's evident. It makes people understand that, and then also it allows for, like, if you have a racist individual guy and he becomes a part of that initiative, for him it's an opportunity to show his face in a place, to make it known that he wants to see change. So I'm not all the time in agreement with some of the things that are done. Sometimes it's more of a pity. By wealthy individuals to not even be involved. But sometimes, it's an opportunity for a guy to be like, I want my face attached to this. We want to be a part of this. And I don't really see another way to do that. And make it known and make it concrete. So I agree with it. I agree that it's necessary, but not in totality.
Good. Now let's transition a bit. And I want to go back, because I don't think we really full circle this particular topic, but why are these dialogues hard to have? Oftentimes, and I want to give us an opportunity to be honest on both sides. Oftentimes, whether it's our own impatience with others, whether it's as soon as, my man says anything that I don't agree with or that I don't think is necessarily right, I tag him as a racist. Because I think oftentimes, as African Americans, when we're dialoguing, when we're engaging with different individuals who may not be as well versed in race, as soon as they say something that we don't necessarily like or agree with, we can have a tendency sometimes to throw them under the bus. But because we're frustrated, because we think, in a sense, you should get this. And I think there's something, in a sense, that's called, I call it black privilege, and that's not very creative, but okay. In a sense that we've had the gift, I think, in a lot of ways, and this is my pious side coming out, but we've had the gift to be the minority. I think it's one of those things that it's a gift and a curse, because you begin to see life from a more humble state. And I think oftentimes we think that everyone should understand what it's like to grow up as a minority. The same way that you can't really understand how this person is unable to conceive or grasp your burdens and your concerns and your issues. It goes both ways. We're all, in a sense, are products of our environments, and we can only know what it is that we've been taught, unless otherwise it comes from divine revelation. And if no one has ever engaged us or been patient with us to think through these issues, we are unable to really understand the dialogue until someone says, hey, that's okay, that's not really, but let's actually sit down and talk about this a little bit. Let's talk a little bit about that, about throwing people under the bus. and having healthy, gracious, patient dialogues with individuals. And I'm talking about individuals that actually genuinely want to learn and want to understand, as opposed to individuals who meet with you, talk to you, because they're looking for holes in your arguments, and they have absolutely no interest in what it is that you're saying. And that goes both ways.
I think a part of it has something to do with what we talked about earlier. I think somebody mentioned something about comfort, and I think these conversations are uncomfortable. And I'll be honest, I'd rather have just natural, fun conversation with people that look like me, that listen to the same music as I do. I mean, fundamentally, that's my bias. That's just my comfort zone. And so when I'm asked to come out of that comfort zone and go into another cultural enclave, I would call it, or step into this new spirit, it requires me to, lay aside those biases. It requires me to do some work. And so I think it's more comfortable to just sit back with friends and talk about racism and not confront the other side. And that goes for both sides. Even if whites, feel that, blacks are, I don't know if I necessarily agree with that term, black privilege, but even if whites do feel that they exist, I think they should be comfortable or coming to that spirit where we're both uncomfortable when we can have that conversation. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I don't think any one person would say black privilege exists. They would probably, that's more, maybe a few, but that's more of a term I coined. This is my super spiritual coin that I've termed to actually show us some of the spiritual long-term blessings of being a minority, as opposed to looking at things from a completely worldly standard. Because I'm blessed. I heard a pastor once say, "Hey, I'm black, and I'm sorry that you're not. It's okay. I still love you." And in a lot of ways, I'm glad that I'm black. I'm glad that God made me this way. And I think that a person who's white should be happy that God made them this way. We have unique perspectives and unique abilities that come from, or that are birthed from our different cultural backgrounds and different ethnicities that I think we all need to embrace, as opposed to trying to go the colorblind route. Anybody want to talk about that? I don't really see race. You're not black or white to me, you're just human. And I think that's doing a disjustice to the beauty of God's creation, that it is diverse, that we are different, but none of us lack worth. None of us lack intrinsic worth. There's no hierarchy when it comes to the human race. We're all equal, but we're different.
I would definitely say, I agree. I mean, anything that God defines is sacred. God made you black, He made me white. Our color is sacred. I told you where I was going with that. But yeah, I forgot where I was going with that.
Okay. That's all right. Let's talk about the church. All right. I want to go back around and I want to address.
That's where I was going with that. It's like, it's like, Mike's a Christian, Corey's a Christian. He's my brother. She's my sister. In the greatest sense of the word. Your spiritual family is gonna play a bigger role in your life, and is gonna be greater in your life than your physical family. And when your spiritual family, your bond is the blood of Christ. Your physical family, that's a bond of DNA and your parent. So. Yeah, your race is sacred, but I mean, he's family. Like, there's no higher word for it in the truest biblical sense. He's my brother. So, color blindness, no, but family, yes.
Absolutely. Now, with that being said, how should the church look on Sunday mornings? Because oftentimes, we will make an excuse that, well, I don't go to this church because of a certain theology that I hold to, they don't hold to, or, I don't attend here because of this and because of that. Usually it has a lot to do with music and people like to sing songs that I don't like to sing. That's usually I was shocked, and I was just like, okay, so I'll talk to him. And what we begin to dialogue about is, listen, man, every single creation, part of God's creation, has something unique to offer. Whether that's a perspective or whether that's musical gifts. When God is listening in chapel to those individuals who love Him, who are your brothers and sisters in Christ, He's not turning his nose up at their music. If they're doing it from contrite, repentant hearts that love Jesus and love the gospel and love the church, listen, that's music to God's ears. So who are you to turn your nose up because it's Chris Thompson or because it's Michael W. Smith? The other way around, oftentimes individuals, the black church music oftentimes, instead of it being seen as worshipful, is often seen as entertainment to outsiders, rather than a form of worship. So what I want to talk about is appreciating the diversity and the gifts from different ethnicities, and how is that going to influence the church. I'm not saying that every single church should be multi-ethnic. I realize that. I'm not that guy. If Jackson is 80% African American, the African American churches in Jackson can't just go and create white people to come to the church. It's just not going to happen. But there is something to be said that when we're in diverse areas, I am a big believer that churches should reflect their communities. What do you guys think about the multi-ethnic church when it's appropriate and when it's surrounded by a multi-ethnic community?
What I have a problem with is people, and I have a problem with this regardless of it. I have a problem with driving past 10 churches to get to your church. A lot of that has to do with theology, but color aside, why would you drive past the people that live in your community, people that you're going to rub shoulder with every day, to go to a church? So, I have a problem with driving past any church that you haven't actually been to and investigated and are they speaking truth? Yeah.
I think the multi-ethnic question, especially in Jackson, is very complex, especially thinking about possible future ministry. And when I think about Jackson, it seems to be that everybody is going and planting churches. When we're starting new churches, we're planting them on the outskirts, and nobody is going in. And when I drive, people who are on their way to hell. And so my desire to go to these people is not primarily because of their skin color, but it's primarily because they need reconciliation to God. And so as I think about how best to do that as a Caucasian going into a predominantly African American situation, there will be certain barriers. But we don't tell our missionaries, you're Caucasian, you can't go to Columbia. It just won't work. I believe that the gospel is more powerful than that. Now, I think there's also some wisdom that it might be helpful if I go in with a team that helps to represent the community. So I enjoy multi-ethnic churches. I think it gives us a flavor and a taste. And ultimately, we should be reaching not just across racial lines, but across gender lines, across socioeconomic lines, and tearing down all of these different barriers that sin has created and bringing people to the head, which is Christ. So.
Before we move on, let's talk about what's at the root of racism, because as all of you have pointed out to some extent, we can get really caught up thinking that the issue is only just color. There's a lot deeper than that, a whole lot deeper than that, because usually if you find, so I'll leave you
into the United States in order to work. And so I guess over the centuries that term racism has kind of evolved, but it comes out of this slave trade tradition, I'm just going to say. And today we see manifestations of what has happened back in history, if that makes sense. I really don't know any other way of trying to get to the root of racism without talking about the history. And so I think in this discussion, and when we have these types of discussions, we have to talk about the history too, in order for it to be, truthful and viable.
I tend to spiritualize it a little more. I mean, they're either a human being with a heart, soul, and a mouth. And you see the same issue, with homosexuals. We identify them by their sin. When in actuality, they're human beings with hearts and souls, created in the image of God, that commits acts of homosexuality. So I think, and any time you have a problem seeing people as God defines them, the root of that is not seeing God the root defines of people. And so I definitely go the more spiritual route, with it, and I think that's it.
I guess what I was more so getting at with the question is isms, classism, feminism, chauvinism, and that's different versions of feminism, but that's not what we're talking about. All these isms, what's usually at the root of it? Is it not that we simply like to be around people who are like us? You guys talked about being comfortable and wanting to be around people who make us feel comfortable. And that's usually what I think is at the root of modern day racism. Yes, it was definitely rooted in the past in exploiting a group of people that were unable to fend for themselves. And sometimes people were able to spiritualize it to the certain extent that, we brought the African people over here so that they can become more civilized, I think is how it's been phrased historically. But I'm talking about modern day. Let's bring it home to where we are today. How many isms are there in our day and age as we're talking through these different things?
I'm still stuck on the image spirit. And if you're just saying something, I'm trying to track all the 21st century from the garden. So I'm still focused on the garden.
Takes a while.
So I'm still focused on the garden and staying image spirit. And I think that's like where we start and we need to stay focused on like man's disobedience, man's pushing back against God ultimately, and having just like not having reconciliation with him, which allows him not to have reconciliation with man. Ultimately the Lord says like let them be one as I am one, right? And in John 17, well, we're not even one with God, so therefore we're not going to be one with man. So I'm with you because from that comes history, right? It comes disadvantages and things that happen throughout the time, slavery, all that, spiral from the garden.
I guess what I'm more so targeting is manifestations. That's probably the better way to phrase that. What are some manifestations of these isms? How does this look in our own personal lives? Outside of just ethnicity, we're all, have our isms. Whether like, we like to, I was listening to an interview the other day where a guy by the name of Adam Thompson is a pastor in Damascus, and he's this guy, he's played ball overseas. He was the assistant pastor at this big white church in Dallas, was used to being around a certain type of people, whether they were black or white, and now all of a sudden God's calling him to Flint, Michigan, to plant a church. I don't know if you know anything about Flint, Michigan, but it's not a pretty place to visit, and he talks about that, and he's like, now all of a sudden, the class of individuals that I'm around, even though they're my same skin color, very different than I am. They don't dress the way that I dress. I like to be around individuals that have a certain type of style. They don't have that style. So therefore, I turn my nose, or I'm tempted to turn my nose up at them. Because you can find, to have a heart for the city of Jackson, or to not have a heart for the city of Jackson, you don't have to be black or white or Hispanic. You can be any color. You can be black and not have a heart for the city because you like to be around a certain group of people who are, whether it's class or whether it's anything. So I want to talk about a little bit of that. And you guys have talked about the root of it is how comfortable are you? We want to be comfortable. We I know everybody right here in their stomach are cringing. And just like, oh boy, he broke that one up. And I know that makes a lot of people feel uncomfortable, but I think it's something that needs to be talked about and it needs to be addressed, because if we all believe all that stuff we just said beforehand, how does it apply to this when it gets close, when it gets personal? Let's talk a little bit about interracial marriage.
I think Christians should marry in the Lord. So, no matter how people want to twist the Bible to say they're different, if we're all created in the image of God, then Christians are instructed to marry other Christians.
Now, with that, we do want to, I think, address pros and cons of both, and things to not discourage, but to inform individuals, because oftentimes I think that individuals can go into situations like that completely blind as to what they're going to be dealing with and what they're going to be. And this is not discouragement. This is more so, hey, I'm going to look you and I'm going to walk alongside you. Here's the things that you want to be aware of as you're thinking through an interracial marriage. So let's talk about some pros and cons of interracial marriage.
Definitely the woman is always going to take the most of the heat. I dated a black woman in Mississippi for 2 years, and I had maybe 6 or 7 times when I personally took heat for it. But it doesn't matter if it's a white man, a black woman, or white woman, a black man. It always seems like it's the woman that takes most of the heat from other men and from other women. So I would definitely raise that up as you need to be ready for it, because and I'm not a self-conscious person, so even my girlfriend and I went to Bass Pro Shops, and I'm walking around, because I like turkey hunting, teaching about turkey hunting and shit, and she loves me, so she's trying to learn to love what I love, and we're in there for like 2 hours, and she's like, "Nate, all these people are staring at us," and I was oblivious to it, until she brought it up to me. So, I didn't even know that it was going on. So, you definitely need to be sensitive, to the woman and understand that she's going to take the most of the heat, and you need to be, really listening and, comforting and there's a time to speak up, when it happens, and there's a time not to, I handled it immaturely, there was an 80-year-old black guy who said something to us at the train station. I was knocking him out, but there's a lot of discernment in how to handle situations, and I definitely say that the woman's going to take most of the heat.
My own personal experience with like interracial marriages is that my mom was married to a white guy, and they dated probably since I was 8 in 3rd grade, right? But he didn't marry her until 3 years ago, and that had a lot to do. I know, right? That had a lot more to do with the culture and his father. He was a preacher, and he did not believe in interracial marriages, and he told her that was pretty much the devil, and that he wasn't going to have it. So he was trying to be respectful, I guess, and waited till he passed, and went ahead and married my mother. For me, that leaves a bad taste in my mouth. Not necessarily toward interracial marriages, but toward the South and how we view it and what limitations that put on people for coming together. Because ultimately, I just feel like that's the beautiful part of the body coming together is the ability for us to be able to freely date within Christian realm, black, white, Asian, whatever.
I was on Facebook scrolling, social media, man, it just frustrates me. It's this gift and this curse. But I was scrolling, and now people have gotten to the habit of taking like pictures, and they'll put up a picture, and then they'll all of a sudden write some type of like Facebook card And he continues to, talk about basically degrade white women. So now I'm looking at this post, and all these people are reposting it and talking about how awesome it is and patting this guy on the back. And I'm like, he's doing exactly what she just finished doing to black women. The hypocrisy of it and how it kind of put us back almost 50, 60 years was appalling to me, because I'm just like, okay, she degraded black women, obviously. That was ridiculous. What she said was not right. And then if that guy, if her husband or boyfriend or whoever actually said that, yeah, I would have some heavy words for him about understanding, interracial marriage. He's not helping the deal. But then when you come back to this guy and he begins to degrade white women as well, it's all going against what we're here for tonight. It's completely against racial solidarity. It's completely against saying, hey, we're all made in the image of God. We are all his children. We are all a part of the body of Christ. We are all family. And if we really believe that, initiatives don't necessarily have to be made between any race group as far as marriage. We trust in the Lord for our spouses, and we accept and we thank God for whoever he sends us. Case closed. We marry in the Lord, and we obey him to that end. And we accept whoever he sends us. And this goes for different races, having a preference and saying, man, I guarantee you I'm going to marry this type of girl right here. She's going to be of this persuasion. And no, you, as a Christian, that's nonsense. You marry whoever the Lord puts before you. So I thought that was something that definitely needs to be addressed, because it's not something that's spoken of a whole lot in the South. But I know that it's a huge issue, that if you really want to start seeing people really show their true colors, you're going to talk about interracial marriage. Because again, we'll talk about government initiatives. We'll talk about church initiatives, but when it comes to actually engaging individuals and inviting them in our homes and inviting them to actually have intimate relationships with people who are different from us, that's oftentimes where we want to draw the line. And God's plan of redeeming all things, we can't draw the line there. We have to be wide open to building relationships with individuals across different racial lines, because that's what the gospel, I think, calls us to. Any final comments before we bring Nate up, and then we're going to open the floor to the panel? To the audience, I'm sorry, to ask questions. Any final thoughts? Matter of fact, kind of mandatory that you all will find. That's how we do it. So Scott, we'll start with Scott.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think it's great that we're starting to have these conversations, and I think it'll be even greater if these conversations go with us and we start talking about, ultimately as Christians, we're ministers of reconciliation, each and every one of us, not just pastors. And so we urge men and women and children to be reconciled to God. And we urge men and women and children to be reconciled to each other. And the coolest thing is God is reconciling all of creation to himself. And one day we're going to be together.
I think it's important that we make these things personal. I think the easiest thing for us to do, and this is what tends to be done, is to just attach ourselves to something where solidarity is being talked about, where we don't necessarily have to act, we don't have to include people, we don't have to be in the lives of people. We just, I don't know, maybe it's Americanism, or at least a part of it, to just be a part of something that says something, but we don't actually do what we're saying. So I think it's important that we take the conversation to heart, take the issues to heart, and to move in them. And just really briefly, even the church that I'm starting to attend right now, where the church is constantly getting publicity as far as diversity. Most of the time, it's still, and man, I'm probably getting in trouble for this. Most of the time, it's still just, what we typically do is, we still stick to our corners, But it's very easy for us to say, well, yeah, I'm a part of this church, though. So we attach our names to diversity and racial solidarity, you know, through many different acts and many different initiatives or whatever. But when you look below the surface, most of the time we're not really doing it. You know, you see these people together, they don't actually address anybody different than themselves. They just say, and I know people who actually go to the church for the purpose of saying that they're a part of that thing. So I think it's really, really important that it's not just, oh yeah, black people need to move as a unit. White people need to move as a unit. It's an individual responsibility.
One of the questions that Phil asked us in preparation for tonight was, what can we as individuals do to, I forget how I worded it, but what can we as individuals start to do to remove some of these walls? And I was just thinking about that and just going off of what other people have said about reconciliation, and how we are all reconciled to God, and we're reconciled to God through His love for us and the manifestation of His love for us. And so I was just thinking about that. We're called to love on other people the same way that God has loved us. And what that looks like, if that looks like interracial marriage, that's how God has called us to love on other people. If that looks like just walking across the aisle of the church and talking to someone who you normally wouldn't talk to, that's loving on them. And just that call to love others, I think, is something that we talk about, again, but we don't always put it into action. And just that will look different for every person in here, and that's part of what makes us unique. But I don't know, I've just been really, really convicted through this time of just what does that look like in my life, and how does God want me to love other people right here and right now?
Just to echo what they said, I mean, I think it definitely is on an individual level, but I think also we do it corporately. I mean, it's not just white thing, black thing, it is the church, it's the body. I think that we all need to have time to get before the Lord individually, and then come together collectively and show His glory through uniting the voices. Now that looks different for every church, it's going to look different in different places locally. I think it's something that we should strive toward and ultimately focus toward.
Just piggybacking on what everybody else before me just said, I think the Bible is talking about oppression. You know, I think Jesus is giving us an answer. He's telling us to do something about it. That's the reason He tells us to go and take care of the poor and unfortunate, etc. And so I think we all come to the Bible with a particular set of lens, and I guess my lens is kind of more directed, you know, looking from the bottom up and looking at the ways in which individuals within that time and place found ways to come up, to rise up. And I think Jesus was working through all of that. And so while we need to emphasize Jesus and we need to emphasize Christ and togetherness, we also need to emphasize action. And, you know, I think they said it perfectly when they said we need to be trying to get out of our corners, out of our comfort zones, and, you know, trying to engage the other. Because that's what it's really all about. We fear the other, and so we either hate the other or we create stereotypes about the other to make ourselves feel better about ourselves. You know? And we see that throughout the Bible. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is let's take that lesson